most of the power is in the Speaker's office today. And committee chairs, whether on appropriations or any other committee, are really kind of functionaries. They're more like employees of the Speaker. Their job, and that's one sad commentary about what's happened to the Congress. Members of Congress today aren't real legislators in what I think is a robust sense, where you have a lot of people putting their minds to the task and trying to figure out the best course for America. It's really more like, it's not exclusively, but it's more like they're functionaries. As a member of Congress, your job is to raise money for the party, plain and simple, and give the Speaker your vote on almost everything. Or the leader of your party, if you're a Democrat in the House today. What's happened is, since 1995, is that the parties, which are private groups incidentally, there's nothing in our Constitution or our laws that make parties any kind of a public entity. They are private clubs, bipartisans, and they've taken over the process. But we can talk more about that. But anyway, the committee structure is more a facade today than anything else.
Now we've got plenty of time for questions about virtually anything.
Yeah, I'm here as long as you want.
Okay.
I was going to ask what you just said about congressmen being no longer legislators, but more so party advocates. So, but we've seen a lot. I would agree with you. I'd say more I mean, for most of this past decade, but I feel like more as recent, the parties have seen a lot of breaking apart and a lot of more individualism. Some of the congressmen, especially with the introduction of the Tea Party and some other elements that are, more fragmentary towards that, especially the GOP. I feel like congressmen aren't necessarily party advocates, because I feel like if that was the case, it may be easier to get things passed in Congress, whereas there's a lot of friction between even individuals now. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I agree with you that the parties are not monolithic. There are many subgroups inside each of the parties. But the question is, where is the party discipline? I could kind of diagram this for you a little bit, and I won't go into the awful long history, but during the speakership of people like Joe Cannon, all the power was in the Speaker's office. So you had a very, very strong Speaker, and the reform against that was the seniority system. People don't remember that. But the seniority system was a reform against all power being in the Speaker. And so the seniority system really broke up the Speaker's thing so that not only was, and the Speaker's power was made smaller, but then the committee chairs were empowered. And they were selected on the basis of, it's a matter of selection, personal selection, based on how long they've been on the committee. So the Speaker didn't determine who the chairs were. It was based on how long you'd been on the committee, and that was based on how many times you'd been reelected. So this pertained for a long period of time until about the 1970s, when people in the Congress decided that the seniority system itself had certain problems because it put too much power in the chairs of the committees. And this was particularly important during the Civil Rights era, when the people who got reelected time and time and time again were Southern conservative Democrats. And they were the chairs of the committees. And it didn't really matter if the speaker was pro-civil rights. They could bottle up legislation in committees and not pass civil rights reforms. So by the 70s, that was, throughout the 50s and the 60s, this was boiling. But by the 70s, it really reached a zenith. And what happened was, an idea was invented to sort of put a check and balance, if you will, on the speakers, on these chairs, and it was the caucus. Now, I will use the word caucus because that is the term that the Democrats use. The Republicans have a caucus, they call it a conference. Same thing. All the Democrats, all the Republicans meeting together. So the Democrats decided that caucuses, whether Republican or Democrat, should have some control over who is the chair of the committee. Seniority still would be preeminent, but then that only allowed you to be nominated, but your chairmanship was, you were elected by the caucus. Seniority, in other words, the most senior person would be up for an up or down vote on whether they would continue or not, and they could be voted down, and frequently were, and then they'd have to run against somebody else, and it would be a competition. I'm not going to draw them all, but that's what happened. So it was power of the chairs in the committees, but modified. They owed their job not just to seniority, but they owed their job to the caucus. Now this is a good news, bad news kind of thing. It worked for a long time, and it worked largely because the Democrats put this reform into place in the 70s, about the time I was elected. And it worked through the 80s, and it worked through much of the 90s. But it was a scheme that was authored by the Democrats. And so they operated it as they intended to operate it. But then what happened was that in 1995, the Republicans threw the Democrats out. And what they did was throw out this. Whoops. Throw out this, and we're back to everything being in the Speaker's office. Yeah, you have committees. Yeah, you have chairs of committees. The chairs of the committees in the new regime, the Speaker selects the chairs of the committees. And here's what's really insidious. Those chairs are up for auction. Maybe some of you heard about this, but it hasn't been widely reported. So if you want to be a chair of a committee in the Congress of the United States today, it's all about money. The Speaker will come to you and say, I'm about to appoint you to be Speaker, or to be chair of a committee. And I would like from your campaign to my campaign, essentially, about $50,000. Well, maybe you don't play that kind of a game. Or maybe you can't come up with $50,000. Well, you don't want to do it? How about you? You give me $50,000, you're on the same committee, I'll appoint you Speaker. That's exactly the way it happens today. Exactly the way it happens. It's been documented in a number of cases where people have been passed over because they will not give the Speaker money. Now, it's not just, I don't want you to think that that Speaker putting it in his own wallet. It's money to the campaign committee. It's money to the Speaker's Political Action Committee, the so-called leadership PACs. You know, it's what are you going to do for me to be chair? That's what's deciding this to it.
And it's both parties.
That's the other thing. I want to say clearly, this was instituted by Newt Gingrich, but when Pelosi took over, she didn't change it. In fact, she expanded it. So now what's happened is, actually, as a Democrat, this is a hard thing to say, but in a way, one of John Boehner's problems is that he has tried to reform this a little bit. John Boehner is more of a reformer in this kind of dynamic than Nancy Pelosi was. He's still asking for money. Money still drives the process. But he has reformed it slightly, and is giving chairs a little bit more power, even those he selects. He's giving them a little more discretion, but not a lot. But that's what we've got now. It's a sorry broken process. Yeah.
So, so the Speaker of the House has the ability to change how that works, then?
Well, this is the role of the caucus. This gets to the caucus. And this is where, going back to who asked the question about it's not, this is a little oversimplified diagram, but I would say there's also the caucus. That is a little bit different because now the caucus reigns supreme. Incidentally, the caucus has rules. But the only rules that you and I kind of think are important for the Congress of the United States are the Constitution, and the Constitution says that the House and the Senate shall make their own rules. So the House and Senate have rules. But standing in the shadows are the rules of the caucus. Because the caucus of the majority party, and now this is the House, the Senate's a little bit different, you want to talk about that, we can do that. But the caucus rules determine what the House rules are. And the caucus rules determine this kind of stuff. And those aren't, I suppose you can go on the internet and find the House Republican Conference rules or the House Democratic Caucus rules. The only rules that matter are the ones of the majority party anyway. But that's what's going on, and here's where Boehner's got a problem. It's because he's got enormous power. He's the most powerful person in the Congress, and he's the most powerful person in his caucus. But the caucus is a little bigger than he is. So Tea Party activists and whatever else, what other factions, they're really sort of in charge. And of course, Boehner's got his own rivalry with Cantor and Majority Leader and all these other things going on. So the system is really broken. I mean, the two scholars, Norm Ornstein and Tom Mann, have written books about this stuff. And their first book was The Broken Branch. And their second book is It's Worse Than It Looks. And I've talked to Norm about what the title of the third book is going to be.
We've actually talked about both of those here in this class and about it. And maybe that will lead to the next question about and to others, is see me encapsulate this one. You've seen Congress in your day when it used to pass a lot of legislation, and there seemed to be at least times of bipartisan cooperation. To the Congress of today, things have changed. How and why have things changed, Bob? And should or can anything be done about it?
Well, we've got to do something about it. But the thing is that buttressing the money thing is gerrymandering. We've talked about that before. So what's really happened now is that the districts, parties have always tried to lay in a fix. That is, lay in a permanent victory through reapportionment. Going back to Governor Jerry, basically. The thing that's different today, though, is technology. In the old days, I'll take my own district, for example. My district was designed to be a Republican district, using the technology of the day. However, they did it on the assumption that city clerks in East Lansing would be able to keep students from voting. I got to Congress in part because of an issue I had with voter suppression, and I was being the guy suppressed. And we now hear voter suppression talk in the last campaign. So, but my district was designed to be a Republican district, to give an advantage to the Republicans. But that depended on them keeping student registration at Michigan State very low, and it was based on certain back-of-the-envelope analysis of what voting behavior would be in small townships and small towns and a whole host of other things. That's all changed. With computer technology, your smartphone has the computing capability of designing a district using big data in the cloud that will probe the down to the granular level the voting tendency of everybody in a geographic area. So the designer districts of today aren't like the gerrymandering of yesterday. They are a big super fix. So what have they done? They've managed to create these districts where the extremes of each party have more influence. But I would say, frankly, it's more the Republican Party. The extremes of the Republican Party, the Tea Party, if you will, have the ability to determine the politics of that whole district. Why? Because the contest is in the primary, it's not in the general election. Between 35 and 50 seats, 10% or less of the Congress of the United States have seats which are truly competitive. The rest are all decided on based on reapportionment. You know, why even bother? And within those districts, the organized, in the Republican district, the organized Tea Party types, they hold sway. So even a member of Congress who is a moderate Republican, who wants to make deals, who wants to do the right thing, who looks at his or her own mission as trying to get something done, has to be looking over their shoulder at some Tea Party activist running against them in a primary. That's where the contest is. So if you're a Democrat in that district, you don't even need to bother with that. You don't have a voice. There's no way you can impact that process. So it's reapportionment, and then the money thing has gotten really worse. It started with a court decision by the name of Buckley versus Vallejo. Buckley versus Vallejo was a court decision many years ago that decided that not only do natural people have free speech, but they can amplify their free speech to the detriment of everybody else if they have money. So in a sense, the money can amplify a person's speech, even if it's drowning out the speech of the person next door. Well then, the Citizens United case came along and said not only do natural persons have free speech, but artificial persons have free speech, i.e. corporations. Not labor unions, but labor unions. I mean, it's really, that was really a corporate decision. So you take those two things, and then I'll add a third one, and this is for the United States Senate alone, the filibuster, abuse of the filibuster, which I will submit submit to you is unconstitutional. There's a court case that's winding its way through the courts right now on that issue. But those three things are why we got where we're at today.
Now, I promised these folks I'd try to take a break right about now, but
Okay.
with the next maybe 5 minutes, if anybody's got a question
Do
related
you want me
to.
to come back, or you have some other plan?
We've got to go and talk about the
Okay.
budget today,
Okay.
Bob, so
All right.
unfortunately, but you are invited to come back anytime.
All right.
And like I say, your words will be recorded and used in the subsequent class.
Okay.
So they will echo, they will echo. Any follow-up questions for Congressman Carr related to what you're doing? Go ahead, Michael.
This is more of a general question, but I'm interested in the interaction between the legislative and the executive branches, and I'm wondering if you see the relationship between those change from when you were in Congress, or if the nature of the relationship is always different depending on who is president.
Well, the only thing that's perhaps changed is that now you have, which I think was an honest statement by Mitch McConnell, that his #1 priority was to defeat the president. That was his, I think that was an honest statement on his part. It was a little dumb to make it politically. But, right now, you've got this situation where people don't want to work with a president who's in the opposite party at all, period. Zero. That's what's different. I think there have been times, I'll even say, Carter had very bad relationships with most of the senior members of the Democratic Party when he was president. Members of the Democratic, the senior members of the Democratic Party did not like Jimmy Carter. He didn't invite them to cabinet meetings or something. I don't know. They got annoyed at him. As a junior member, I had a great relationship with him, but senior. So sometimes you'll learn about it in the media if it's a partisan problem. But I think sometimes members of the same party with an executive don't feel appreciated enough and have difficult problems. But today, the partisan angle is so preeminent, and of course, hopefully it's less in Obama's second term because he can't run again. This is, that sort of sucks air out of that balloon. But,
Do you think that people focus too much on the image of a public servant that's supposed to be perfect, and therefore they can't speak their mind in fear of making some mistake that's going to be used against them?
well, yeah, when you're a member of Congress and somebody shoves a microphone in your face, you've got to be very careful what you say. Todd Aiken learned that one. Things that come out of your mouth will take on a life of their own.
Do you think we put too much emphasis on that rather than the candidate's actual mission?
I'm sure, but look, in our society, everything is a shorthand, right? So you just can't operate in society, whether you're in Congress or you're in your job place or you're in class or wherever. We deal in shorthands. And so that's the common currency of how we communicate. And of course, on closer reflection, some of those things just prove to be very wrong or untrue. That's sort of what we're stuck with. And maybe a better question is it getting worse because of technology? I mean, everything, if it can't be 140 characters, is it worth saying?
Now, that is a perfect segue to talk later about what you had done last week in terms of your aspirations and your goals and what comes next. And any of you, by the way, Bob, they talked about what they want to do next and the skills they need to have. Communication, use of communication skills. I'm going to give some of that back to you later, was right on that. We're gonna pick up on that after we take our break right now. But I wanna thank Congressman Carr for our like I say, so I appreciate you doing it. Let's take, I'll tell you what, let's take a 5-minute break.